I'm Bill. This is Ted. We're from the future.
Socrates. Now what?
I don't know. Philosophize with him.
All we are is dust in the wind, dude.
A pair of slackers are destined to change the world with their music, but they have to pass their history report first. This week, we chat about how Tom and Tom beat Bill and Ted, grandfather clock maintenance, and Keanu Reeves historians. Be excellent to each other,
and party on, dudes!
As we find out if Bill and Ted's excellent adventure stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with a glut. Alan says as a father, blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
I'm James M. Brief, MD.
And I am Alan Noah.
And we're the Test of Time.
Get it? Like Wild Stallions, except it's us? You get it. I think the real Bill and Ted fans get it. How you doing there, James?
I'm good. I wish I could go back in time.
Don't we all? I mean, really. So I am excited to talk to you about Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. But first, I wanted to just give you a recommendation because there's something that you and I have talked about over the years, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but you tend to be hesitant to get into a new TV show if you don't know that it like ends on a high note. Is that fair to say? Am I wrong on that?
No, that's not true at all. It just has to end. Like, it has to end the way it was supposed to end. Meaning, it doesn't get cut off after season 2. I don't need everyone to live and be happy. I just don't like to get invested in a new, fun new show that season 1, it ends on a cliffhanger, and then, it just gets canceled after season 1.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I wanted to recommend to you and to any listeners who are looking for a show to binge, Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., because I believe you've mentioned that you haven't watched that show. Is that right?
I think I watched exactly up to the point where the internet said it was just about to start getting good. Like, I think I watched basically the first season, and I was like, this is really lame. Like, it's like a lame CW show.
Really?
I remember thinking, like, I was just so bored by it. Like, I was kind of excited. Finally, Marvel on television. And then it was kind of boring. I remember the next season when Captain America, the Winter Soldier came out, and they were like, oh, it's going to tie into Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting, but I haven't watched it. So, it wasn't like it was, like, easy to catch up on that back then.
Gotcha. Well, I'm not going to say any spoilers for people who haven't seen it and are interested in it, but the series recently did wrap up with season 7. It was planned. They knew it was going to be the final season. They knew it going in, and the last season was really strong. The finale was great, and if you meaning you, James, or any of our listeners are sort of like hurting for MCU content because we didn't get Black Widow in the spring and who knows when that will be released, and the Eternals got pushed back and all of the Disney Plus shows got pushed. I genuinely think that this is a really good show. There are some parts along the way that maybe weren't so strong, but overall I thought it was a really good show and I was very happy with the way it ended. And I wanted to just put that out there that if you're looking for some new content, specifically Marvel content, I think you could do a lot worse. The first 6 seasons are on Netflix. The last season is on Hulu. I would think maybe at some point they would all come to Disney Plus. I don't know.
No, I've heard the same thing, and it's not MCU by any means, but if you have Disney Plus, they have the entire series of the X-Men cartoon from the 1990s, which is still fantastic. I mean, it was very ahead of its time, a serialized story on Saturday morning cartoons. It was really well done, so check it out. It has a lot of the famous stories. It has the Dark Phoenix saga that they never really got right in the movies. It has Days of Future Past, which they did in the films, but they do it more the way the comics did it. They have a lot of real fun storylines. It was pretty good.
Interesting. How many seasons is that?
I think it must be like 5 or 6. Long storylines. Probably a lot of episodic content as well, but there was some overall storylines that was totally brand new when you were watching Saturday morning things. Speaking of Saturday morning cartoons, do you remember the Saturday morning cartoon Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures?
I don't, and I was reading today on Wikipedia about it, and I really don't remember anything about that.
Oh, I totally watched it, and here's a little clip from the theme song.
Bogus!
Adventures most outstanding every day. It's outrageous, so bodacious. Help is always on the way. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures. It's a party, that's for sure.
You probably remember the Back to the Future animated series on Saturday mornings.
Vaguely. I wasn't super into it, but I'm aware of it.
It was basically a similar premise and a very good premise for a Saturday morning cartoon with characters that you like, and it was just time traveling. Oh, this time we're going to go to ancient Rome, and this time we'll go here and there. And Bill and Ted did the exact same thing, just slightly different characters. And you wouldn't call this flick in any way a stoner flick. The characters are much more like California surfer dude, but I feel like it's the grandfather to the dude, where's my car kind of movies.
Yes, I did read today that Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure was number 8 in Rolling Stone's 10 best stoner movies of all time. And I was like, well, it's not really a stoner movie. I guess I can take that up with Rolling Stone. But yeah, I get what you mean. It's kind of the two dim-witted friends genre. But I mean, I had seen this movie countless times. I own it on DVD, but it had definitely been a while since I'd watched it. What's your history with the movie?
That's almost the same thing for me. I never owned it on DVD or anything, but if I didn't see it in the theater, I saw it a ton of times renting it from probably not even Blockbuster. This would have been Captain Video or even the local deli that would also rent videos for $1 or $2.
Yeah, I remember at places like that.
They would all do that stuff. And
Yeah.
But it had been a long time since I'd seen this, probably about 20 years.
I don't know if it's been that long, but it had definitely been a while, and I was really excited to watch it. I watched it with my kids. They enjoyed it. And if you don't remember this movie, it's a story of Bill S. Preston Esquire and Ted Theodore Logan, two dim-witted buddies struggling with high school and their band. One day, just before they're about to fail their report on world history, they meet Rufus, a time traveler from the future. Yeah. Rufus gives Bill and Ted his time machine, which they use to travel to various points in history and return with important figures to help them complete their final history presentation and ultimately save the world?
Basically, what you're summarizing is basically the last sentence, where basically the movie happens and they're like, yeah, everything you just did will ultimately save the world. The end. It's not really far off. It's
Right.
not really coherent in any way.
Right. And obviously we're talking about this movie now because the long awaited, maybe it was awaited, maybe not, sequel is hitting on demand. Bill and Ted Face the Music. But this movie was a modest hit, wasn't it, on its release, James?
Yeah, actually, it was a big hit. And, we already talked about how they had Saturday morning cartoons, they had video games, posters. I mean, these guys were everywhere for a while. And the film had a $10 million budget, and it opened at number 3 on February 17th, 1989, with $6.1 million on its way to $40 million domestically. So that's a 6.5 times multiplier. And the number 1 and number 2 films on that weekend were both headlined by actors named Tom.
Tom Cruise and Tom Hanks?
That's correct. And can you name the film?
1989. Was it Rain Man?
Rain Man was number 2 at the box office with $6.6 million, beating Bill and Ted's debut of 6.1. This was a lesser-known Tom Hanks film.
Give me a hint.
Okay, it has an apostrophe in it, which stands for an abbreviation. Like, it's cutting off part of the word. Like, you know, you'd say, like, about time. It's a comedy.
Oh, The Burbs.
That's right.
Okay, yeah, that's one that we're definitely going to have to review at some point, because I remember seeing that and thinking it was weird, but I would like to revisit that at some point.
So Bill and Ted were beaten by Tom and Tom.
I get it. So the movie starts with this kind of introduction with Rufus, and he's talking directly to camera. And Rufus is the late, great, amazing, wonderful, I cannot say enough good things about him, George Carlin.
Oh, yeah. George Carlin. Like, he was awesome.
Yeah, George Carlin's comedy is phenomenal and brilliant and ahead of its time and just everything. And he didn't act all that much, a little bit here and there, but this has to be one of his more well-known acting roles, I would think.
Yeah, this and some of the Kevin Smith films, he was in those.
Sure, yeah, Dogma, he was very funny in Dogma, that's true. The movie starts with Rufus sort of addressing the camera and talking about the future's really rad, and he needs to go back in time to help Bill and Ted. And it's like this really hokey picture-in-picture effect where you see Bill and Ted like on the side of the screen, and then it just kind of grows larger. And I don't know, it just kind of reminded me of like an effect on my bar mitzvah video, you know, just like the hokiest like thing you could do on video.
I would say this entire opening is useless. And you didn't talk about the opening credits. It's like 2.5 minutes of just this crystal just kind of spinning in the air. It's incredibly boring. And what the movie should open with is the next scene in which we see this garage band that's pretty terrible, and it's Bill and Ted, and it's, you know, it's kind of a test-of-timey thing, but it's something you would have done with an iPhone today. But these guys are camcording themselves in their little garage band, these guys that introduce themselves as Bill S. Preston Esquire, played by Alex Winter, and Ted Theodore Logan, played by a baby-face-looking Keanu Reeves.
Right. Weirdly, my 10-year-old son, as we were watching this, he said, "Is that John Wick?" And I was like, how do you know who John Wick is? But apparently John Wick was in Fortnite, so he recognized Keanu Reeves from that, which I thought was pretty funny. But yeah, I mean, the camcorder is huge. It's a test of time thing. I also love Bill's cutoff shirt, which is such a bizarre fashion choice. I mean, I know we've talked about weird 80s fashion choices on countless episodes.
Oh my God, that belly shirt.
Yeah, like, why was that cool that, like, guys were like, I really want people to see my belly button?
Well, I mean, if you're basically the kind of guy that has a six-pack, yeah, it will look great. Like, I remember, I think the bad guys in Revenge of the Nerds, the Alpha House, Alpha Delta or something, I think they wear those belly shirts. And it's, you know, it's like a football player kind of thing. And it's ridiculous. I mean, it's stupid. So yeah, he's stuck with this shirt the entire film.
Yes, it is pretty funny. Yeah, they can't play. They're awful. They want to make a cool video, but they can't because they suck. And then they want to get Eddie Van Halen to join their band, but they can't because they suck. And it's sort of just like this circle over and over again.
You know, but I have to ask, does your son know who Eddie Van Halen is or the band Van Halen?
I mean, does my son know who Van Halen is? You're goddamn right he does.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, I mean, my son is obsessed with 80s music. Look at his father.
Right. Like, to be fair, if there was a reference to Chicago, the band, or Foreigner, your son might recognize it, whereas most children born in, the Obama administration would not.
That very well may be true, but I do also think that the reference of Eddie Van Halen as a legendary guitar player does sort of stand the test of time. I mean, if you said Jimi Hendrix, that was long before my time, but I know who he is. Like, Van Halen is still played on classic rock radio enough that it's just a known thing. That guy can play guitar.
Maybe, but I have to say that, this film and Fast Times at Ridgemont High, I think that these films assumed that Van Halen was going to be more significant. I'm not downplaying his significance. I think he was, mid-80s dominant. I don't think it's something necessarily that kids today know about.
First off, you're saying he, but Van Halen is the band.
I know. But they also reference Eddie Van Halen in this film a lot of times, where they're like, we need to get Eddie Van Halen to teach us how to play, or we need to get Eddie Van Halen in our band. Like,
right.
It's one of those things. Look, you and I totally understand it, but I don't know who today I would pick that would definitely be around in 20 years. I'm not sure that a Billie Eilish reference is going to be as cool and timely as it is today.
I think that's a fair point, but to be fair, Van Halen did have a pretty long career where they were very big when Fast Times at Ridgemont High came out in 82, and they were still going strong into the 90s, so they were a better pick than some other random 80s band that went nowhere. But let's get off of Van Halen and let's get back to Bill and Ted. So we see them at school and they're in history class and they don't know anything about history. They refer to Napoleon as a short dead dude. And basically their teacher tells them that they're failing. The only way they can pass the class is if they get an A+ on the big history report, which is the next day. And not only that, but Ted's father is threatening to ship Ted off to military school in Alaska if he fails. And I Googled it because I was curious. Apparently there are military schools in Alaska, but I still think that's just like a funny gag. Like, I'll ship you off to boarding school. I'll ship you off to military school, but I'll ship you off to military school in Alaska just kind of like adds an extra level of like insanity to it, which I appreciated.
Alaska's cold, but it's beautiful. I have been there. So Ted would have had a beautiful view.
Well, I guess that's a good point. But they don't want to go, so they're working very hard and they're trying to study, but then they're interrupted by Bill's hot stepmom, Missy, and Bill's dad wants to have a little alone time with his wife, Missy. So they send Bill and Ted to the Circle K, which is a convenience store in Southern California. And this is just great stuff right here when they're like trying to study by asking the random people who are walking into the convenience store history questions. Like, that's just the most lazy kind of like doing work. They could have gone to, say, a library, but no, they go to the convenience store instead.
They ask one lady, "Excuse me, ma'am, when did the Mongols rule China?" They could have picked up at least an encyclopedia or gone to the library. You're right. But they're not studying for an exam, though. They're trying to answer a question, which is, what would the historical figures from society think of the world of San Dimas of today? And they even specifically, to their credit, say the world of 1988.
Yeah, and this movie was supposed to come out in 1988, but there were some behind the scenes troubles with the company behind it. So that's why it got pushed to 89. But the time machine falls from the sky and it looks like a phone booth, which is in and of itself a test of time thing because phone booths are not a thing anymore.
And even back then, I think it was kind of unique to see one. Yeah, they were around, but you didn't see them much. You saw those kind of half booths. They would have a little wall on the side, maybe a little roof and two walls.
Right. Kind of like the open air sort of thing.
Yeah, more of an open concept.
Right, right. But as the phone booth falls from the sky, what does Ted say? Did you happen to catch it?
No.
He says his trademark. Well, not his trademark, but Keanu Reeves' trademark.
Oh, yeah.
Whoa. So I was thinking to myself, hey, this is a pretty young Keanu Reeves. I wonder if this is his first whoa. And I looked it up. Apparently, some Keanu Reeves historian has documented every whoa that Keanu Reeves has ever said. This was definitely not his first whoa. He had said it in a made-for-TV movie before this and a couple of other theatrical movies that I didn't recognize the names of, The Night Before and The Prince of Pennsylvania.
I mean, I'm not surprised this exists. I mean, you've been to YouTube. This absolutely had to exist. I mean, you knew to go to YouTube and search Keanu Reeves woes, and you know a video is going to exist from it.
Yeah, I mean, I did watch a compilation of all of his woes. I didn't see all of it, but can you guess how many times he says whoa in this movie?
I'm going to guess he says whoa 10 times.
Nope. Higher.
Baker's dozen?
27.
Wow, that's more than 2 baker's dozens.
That's right. That's right. And weirdly, he says it 27 times in Bogus Journey as well, which is a strange coincidence, but there you go. But getting back to the scene, Rufus is telling them that he can take them back in time and they don't really know what to believe, but then another phone booth drops from the sky, and it's Bill and Ted from the future, and they say, oh, you should trust Rufus, he'll help you out. And they say, how do we know that it's the real us? All right, we're thinking of a number. What number are we thinking of? And then they say in unison, 69, dude. That is all the proof they need. Now they're on board. Now they believe it.
I read that in the German dubbing and translation of this film, they ask, who's your favorite celebrity? And then in unison they say, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I mean, is that less corny or more corny than the 69 joke?
I don't know.
I guess an Arnold reference makes sense there in 1989. Whatever. But yeah, I mean, not only is the phone booth sort of a test of time thing, but the concept of a phone book, which has all of the numbers and the listings for how to go in time.
Oh, even the operator that talks to them with that error sound that everyone age 30 and up recognizes, and the operator says, boop, boop, beep, I'm sorry, the time you've dialed can't be reached right now. Please call back. We totally know what that's referencing, but your kids have never heard that error before.
Right, right. They also say, let's reach out and touch someone, which was the slogan from Bell, I think, right?
Yeah, it was one of the bells. Probably all the bells.
I guess. And there's also a thing about future Ted tells present day Ted, don't forget to wind your watch, which is also a test of time thing. I mean, I've had digital watches, I feel like probably even since the early 90s. So watch winding hasn't been a thing I've had to worry about in a long time. I mean, I guess they still make analog watches.
Well, it's not about analog. It's a quartz watch, meaning basically that it's battery run versus the old time ones. You actually had to wind the watch every day, and the tension from it slowly kind of unwinding would power the clock. So when it got slow, you had to remember to wind your watch. It's like those old grandfather clocks, the really old ones that you would have to actually like move the hammer every once in a while so that the pendulum would keep going.
Okay. I never had a grandfather clock, but thank you for the tip.
Well, the ones today would all have some kind of battery backup or something.
I mean, today you could just be like, Alexa, fix the grandfather clock.
That's true. That's true.
So the first place that Rufus takes the boys on their adventure, their excellent adventure, is to France in the early 1800s, and they see Napoleon, and then Rufus is like, well, okay, there he is, let's go. And they get back into the phone booth. They don't bring Napoleon back like on purpose. There's a cannonball explosion and Napoleon just kind of like falls with them through the quote unquote circuits of time. And it's almost like an accident that they bring him, but it seems like Rufus knew that that was going to happen and that was part of his plan, I think.
Yeah, they're never even instructed to gather people from history. They're just supposed to learn about history. But also, this goes once again that this is the only Napoleon battle scene we've ever seen on the big screen. For some strange reason, Hollywood has never done it. I think it's because they don't know which side to make, the good side and bad side. In a war, there always has to be good and bad. But anyway, they don't want to bring Napoleon with them to gather other people, so they decide to leave Napoleon with Ted's little brother, Deacon.
Right. And Deacon, like, kind of can't be bothered, but he does a decent job of babysitting Napoleon.
He takes him to an ice cream shop, and it's totally supposed to be Ben and Jerry's when they used to have that thing, the Vermonster, because there's a part where they all eat this enormous sundae, and it's great because Napoleon's like, oh, la glace, and he loves eating everything. He acclimates to 1988 really well.
Yes, he does. They all do, as we'll see later. But Deacon also takes Napoleon bowling, and it's the old-timey way of scoring with a pencil. And I do say old-timey because I feel like when I went bowling as a kid in the 80s, all of the places had the electronic scoring. But the scene when Napoleon like tries to bowl and then falls down and then starts hitting the ground and cursing over and over and over again, my 10-year-old was cracking up. Like it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen.
It's good physical comedy, this guy. I like him. But he really pisses off the kids, and they wind up ditching him. So the manager throws him out because Napoleon, who, by the way, is dressed in full military gear with his military hat on.
Of course.
Right, that French helmet. Now he's walking around San Dimas totally alone.
And we'll come back to Napoleon later on, but let's go back to Bill and Ted and their trips through history. So their next stop is to the Old West, and they talk about how it's like frontier land, like at Disneyland, the Old West section, except you can get shot. And while they're there, they meet Billy the Kid, or as they call him, Mr. the Kid.
And when they go to the saloon, they ask for a beer and they get served and they go, whoa, he didn't even card us.
Right. They're excited about that. There's like a huge bar brawl that breaks out when Billy the Kid is cheating. And in the ensuing melee, Bill and Ted save Billy the Kid, and he appreciates that. And they kind of just become fast friends from there.
That's right, and he hops in their phone booth and they escape, and from there they go to ancient Greece. And I'll tell you that one of the most brilliant humans of all time, it's almost impossible for me to say his name the way you're supposed to say it, at least in English, because of this film. I don't know about you, but in my head, for the last 30 years or so, this guy has been the ancient Greek philosopher known as, what, Al?
Socrates.
Exactly.
I had to explain to my kids that, like, that's funny because his name is Socrates. But they don't speak Greek because, of course, they don't. And they're trying to communicate with him. And Bill tells Ted that he should philosophize with him. And Ted says, all we are is dust in the wind, which is obviously a quote from, you know the song, right, James?
It's Bon Jovi. I'm not sure which one.
No, it is Dust in the Wind by Kansas, and you knew that. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you're just messing with me. And Socrates is really impressed by this, and then is like, okay, fine, I'll go along with you. Why not? And then from there, they go to medieval England. And earlier, when they met their future Bill and Ted versions of themselves, the future version said, say hello to the princesses. And they say, who? And they say, you'll see. And here's where they meet the beautiful princesses. But as they're entering the castle, they get discovered, and it sort of seems like Ted is killed when he falls down a flight of stairs, and like the suit of armor that he was in, like a bad guy kind of goes over to it and stabs it. And Bill thinks that Ted has been killed.
This is without a doubt my least favorite scene in the entire film, and the part that I would have cut out completely. It's incredibly stupid because Ted is pushed down the stairs by accident. He tumbles down, and Bill runs right after him. You see Ted laying on the ground, and another guy comes and stabs him, says, "Search the castle," and somehow the answer not explained really any better than, "Oh, I fell out of my armor." It's incredibly stupid.
It is. And then making matters worse, when Bill finds that Ted is alive, they hug, and then they both say in unison the F word. And we've talked about this in countless other episodes throughout our time doing this podcast. It's always bad, but it seems even a little bit worse when the person who says it is like a beloved actor. I'm thinking back to our Teen Wolf episode, and it was Michael J. Fox who said it. Like, oh, Keanu Reeves, you said it? You know better than to say it.
They could have said any other word, but they said this, and you wouldn't say that probably 5-10 years later.
Right. I think it's a word that had a short shelf life, but it lasted for too long, obviously. So then the King, I guess, finds Bill and Ted as they're sneaking around the castle after they are talking to the princesses, and he threatens to throw them into an Iron Maiden, which they are excited about because that's the name of the heavy metal band. But an Iron Maiden is a torture device, which is, why they named their heavy metal band after it.
Right, and Iron Maiden is not something that people would necessarily know today. They were a big metal band in the 80s, but I don't think they're in the zeitgeist of people today.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't think Iron Maiden has a ton of fans. But also, right after the King says, throw them in the Iron Maiden, then he's like, execute them, and goes to behead them, which is very different from putting them in an Iron Maiden. But I guess the beheading leads to a more dramatic rescue scene where they are rescued by Billy the Kid and Socrates. I'm going to keep calling him Socrates because in this movie, it's Socrates, right? I think we can agree on that.
They introduce him as Socrates, except at the very end on stage. And they narrowly escape execution. They get out in time, and they all get in the phone booth. But there's this one night in that time that he swings his mace, and we don't realize it yet, but he's damaged the antenna that's on top of the phone booth. It's starting to go a little haywire, and they suddenly are sent to a place that they don't really know what it is yet. Like, we know it's the future, but they get out and they see the same characters that were talking to Rufus in the beginning of the film.
Right. And in the credits, these three people are referred to as the three most important people in the world. Did you happen to recognize any of them?
No, I mean, they're all behind, huge 80s neon sunglasses that you can't really see beyond that.
Yes, but I recognize the main guy, the one in the middle. That is Clarence Clemens, who is the famous sax player from Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band. I'll confess that I didn't recognize the other two, but it's Fee Waybill from the Tubes and Martha Davis from the Motels. These are just musicians that the writers knew and they had connections to. But Clarence Clemens was always wearing those like weird 80s outfits, so he sort of looked the same. But yeah, this is the future utopian society, and it's nice to see a movie where in the future it's a utopian society instead of a dystopian society, right? Like once in a while, why can't they have everything figured out?
Almost in kind of a Star Trek kind of way, that things will work out with the human race and, things will be okay. I agree with you. It's kind of nice. So they get just a good feel of this place, and they're just asked to say some, words of wisdom to them. So Bill says, be excellent to each other. And Ted says, party on, dudes. And as we find out throughout the film, that is actually how these future people greet each other.
Right. And as far as words of wisdom go, I think maybe the world would be a better place if we decided to just all be excellent to each other.
And if you combine it with that popular, that British slogan, keep calm and carry on, if it was be excellent to each other and party on, I think that'd be a pretty good slogan for people to live by.
I agree. It is weirdly profound in a pretty stupid movie about time travel and calling Socrates Socrates. But yeah, so then they go through history and they just pick up more historical figures along the way. They pick up Sigmund Freud,
who they call Sigmund Freud.
Right.
They pick up Joan of Arc,
played by Jane Wiedlin from the Go-Go's.
They pick up Genghis Khan, and then they finally pick up Daniel Day-Lewis.
No, they pick up Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This guy who plays Lincoln, I think, is great. He's a very Lincoln-y Lincoln.
Oh, he's great. I mean, I would say Lincoln's an easy character like Santa to kind of get someone to look accurate, or at least to the accuracy that we've customized ourselves to think he looks like, you know? I mean, if we ever saw Lincoln, we'd be like, where the fuck is your hat, dude? You have to wear that hat that you're supposed to wear. He's like, oh, that one thing I probably wore in one portrait once? No, I don't really wear that thing.
Right. And Beethoven. We forgot that they also collect Beethoven. Then they end up going back to that scene earlier where they land outside the Circle K, and now we see it again, but from the perspective of the future Bill and Ted. And there's a great line where one of the guys says, whoa, that conversation made more sense this time. Because, now we have the additional context of everything else that happened.
Yeah, I love this scene. This scene doesn't have to be included in this film, and it's more clever than it has to be. It could just be Rufus telling them, you need to go back in time, and then they go back in time and do everything that they do in the film. This particular scene, I think it adds a layer of cleverness to it that, it doesn't have to have.
I agree. I totally agree with that. Meanwhile, Napoleon, after he got ditched at the bowling alley, he goes to a water slide park called Waterloo.
Oh, fantastic.
Right. I mean, that's a good gag.
At first, he's terrified. He's like, qu'est-ce que c'est? He doesn't know what this thing is. And then he's terrified, and then he loves the water slide. He's pushing kids out of the way. And then he's like overwhelmed with joy, and he's like telling kids, oh, you've got to check, c'est magnifique. And it's fantastic.
It is. It is really funny. There is in real life a water park in San Dimas. It's called Raging Waters. I've been there a bajillion years ago when I was a kid, bajillion not being a technical term. But I remember liking it. I remember having a good time there.
Oh, as opposed to that water park when you're 10 years old that you hate? You could be on one of those 4-foot plastic water slides that's on the side of someone's pool, and you'd be like, oh my God, this is the most luxurious thing in the world. I mean, you can't hate a water park when you're that young.
I hear what you're saying, but my dad did take us to a bunch of water parks in Southern California, and there were some really good ones. And I remember there was one that had 4 water slides, and yes, they were fun. And yes, we had a good time going on those 4 water slides over and over again. But I remember thinking this place is lame. We should have gone to the other one.
Oh, no, I totally get if you're doing the California Water Park Tour 1989, you're definitely going to compare them.
Yes.
Even better than the Waterloo scene, I think, is the mall scene.
Remember, the history assignment is what would these historical figures think of San Dimas today? And in order to show them modern society, an easy place to bring them is the mall. And again, we've talked about this in other movies where, in the 80s and the 90s, the mall was the place to go. And now not so much, even not because of COVID. I mean, just talking in general, the mall isn't the mega popular hangout destination that it once was.
Honestly, where would you bring them today? Maybe a Target?
Target's actually not a bad idea. I don't know. I mean, I think the mall was sort of just a go-to destination for movies and TV shows and things like that. But yeah, what is the 2020 equivalent? I'm not exactly sure. That's a good question.
But at first, the guys are kind of walking around, and there's a couple things they're figuring out. Beethoven's kind of trying out the keyboard. There's a little gag. The dealer's like, "Are you a musician?" And Sigmund Freud is trying to hit on these two young women, and he's like talking in the very, very professor manner. And the women are like, "You're such a geek." And Billy the Kid and Socrates laugh at him, and Socrates just goes, "Haha, geek."
That's a good line. I like when they first get to the mall and Bill or Ted tells Socrates to watch his robe on the escalator. It's a quick throwaway line, but I thought that was really funny because, yeah, he should be careful with his robe on the escalator, and that's not a thing he's going to know. So that's like good looking out, you know? Watch out for the robe on the escalator, Socrates.
Yeah, and while the two of them pick up Napoleon from Waterloo, the rest of the historical figures, they basically get loose and they go crazy in the mall. It's a montage, and it's, Al, is this a famous electric guitar song that I'm supposed to know?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. All right, because it kind of sounds like speed metal Beethoven, which it probably is some kind of remix of something. Genghis Khan, he goes into the sports store and he finds a metal bat, which he bites into and realizes that it's a way superior weapon than the club that he's holding. So he starts swinging it around and causing enormous destruction.
Right. And Joan of Arc is really intrigued by this like fitness demonstration that's apparently happening in the middle of the mall. I don't remember seeing like live jazzercise, sweating to the oldies things in malls, but whatever, you forgive it. And then, she shoves the instructor out of the way and she's doing her moves. And basically, they all get arrested. They don't go to mall jail. They all get picked up by the actual police and go to the real police department. And that's where Ted's dad works. He's a police captain, and it's just convenient to get them all in one place. And the logic that Bill and Ted use to break everyone out of jail is that they need to get the dad's keys, but how are they going to do that? I know. After we do everything else and we pass the history exam, we'll go back in time to 2 days ago, we'll get my dad's keys and we'll leave them, I don't know, over here. And then the keys are there. So it's just like the ultimate time travel logic, which is circular logic, which it makes sense and it works because it has to, because it already did. And it's a little confusing, but like, it's a great device for a movie like this where people aren't going to be nitpicking like the time travel rules. You're just kind of going to go, okay, sure, why not?
It doesn't make sense, but I think they're laughing along with you.
Yes, I agree. And, some of the things that they use are a tape recorder that's on a timer. I never heard of a tape recorder with a timer, but okay, whatever. They use that to distract Ted's dad. They send themselves a fax where it's like, hey, Bill, hey, Ted, Wild Stallions rules. Oh, by the way, duck. And, just little things like that. A garbage can that they drop on Ted's dad's head.
Which seems to appear out of nowhere, by the way.
I mean, I guess there was a garbage can hanging over his head that he just didn't notice.
There was a garbage can hanging from the ceiling of the police station that said Wild Stallions rule, and nobody noticed this. That's okay. In this kind of film, that's okay. The point is they break everyone out of jail and they make it in time for the speeches. And while they're breaking them out and rescuing everyone from the mall, the speeches have been going on. And, a lot of the speeches are kind of boring, or some are very, you get the impression that they're very good. But there's this one guy that has the classic speech, and he's like this meathead jock with the varsity football Leatherman's jacket, and he's like, I don't know what they would think, and he obviously didn't really prepare, and he doesn't have the audience engaged, and he just goes, San Dimas High School football rules! And the whole audience erupts in applause. But the history professor's like, C+.
Right. But the teacher's ready to flunk Bill and Ted because they are too late. But then just in the nick of time, they show up and they try to command the attention of the entire audience. And in order to get everyone's attention, Billy the Kid takes out his gun and shoots a light in the auditorium. And that kind of gets everyone to be like, oh, okay, I guess we'll pay attention. Now, that's a joke that really doesn't stand the test of time. A gun in a high school that's like fired and everyone's like, oh, interesting. Like, that's just not a funny gag anymore.
No, it could have easily been Genghis Khan slicing some, high school musical prop in half that was on stage there. It could have been
Sure.
anything else but a gun. Because of this, Billy the Kid is probably not even a good historical figure. Or he's fine, just don't have him ever fire his gun.
Right.
You use the lasso. That's what he can use.
Yeah, I mean, it was not great. But they kind of go through all of the different historical figures. They all sort of give their perspectives on San Dimas, kinda, some more than others. Freud just basically analyzes Ted and gives this whole spiel about your father and his own insecurities. He's projecting them on you, and that's why he's threatening to send you to military school in Alaska. And then you get another great Keanu, whoa, like right after that. And then Freud asks Bill if he wants to be analyzed. And he's like, no, I'm good. Just got a slight Oedipus complex. Because he's got the beautiful stepmom who, it is very heavily implied, had a relationship with the history teacher. She walks in and she's like, oh, hi, it's so nice to see you. It's made clear that they were an item.
Oh, yeah. That was fantastic. And this is a running gag. She's been friendly with a lot of the people in this community.
Yes, I think that is a fair assessment. But the last historical speaker to take the stage is Abraham Lincoln. And, that makes sense. He's a guy who knows how to make a rousing speech. And he also says the Bill and Ted lines, be excellent to each other and party on, dudes. He really nails that dramatic pause there. But they get the A+ that they needed to get. And Bill and Ted are not going to be separated. Ted's not going to be sent off to military school. And then there's this scene at the end where they're like, hey, we met all of these historical figures. We had this excellent adventure, but nothing changed. And then Rufus shows back up.
Yeah, Rufus explains to them that their music is going to be the basis for peace of all mankind. They think it's what helps them grow better crops, and they reach out to aliens, and it's basically the greatest thing that ever happens. And we get more details of this in the credits of the next film, but their music is going to be the basis of this future perfect utopian society.
Right, and this is the first time that they mention that in the whole movie, and then you're like, oh, so that's why it was important that they had to not be separated, and why Rufus was sent back in time to help them out with this important quest for their history report, because the entire future civilization is based on their music. But yeah, it is kind of just like this throwaway thing at the end of like, oh yeah, that's why we did it. Anyway, mind if I jam with you guys? And it's very clearly not George Carlin playing the guitar. You see like the close-up shots of his face and then the separate close-up shots of the hands. And we forgot to mention, Rufus brings back the princesses. He went back in time. He rescued them before they had to marry like those old medieval dudes or those ugly medieval dudes.
Royal ugly dudes.
Yeah. So then the girls are there and hey, they're in the band too. And they all start playing and they suck. And Rufus once again looks to camera and says, don't worry, they get better. And that's the end of the movie.
That's it.
So James, what are your thoughts? Do you think that Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure stands the test of time?
It's interesting that I'm watching right now on Netflix. There's this show, The Umbrella Academy. So that's very popular right now. And that deals with, in part, there's some organization that needs to make sure that certain events in history go the way that they're supposed to. And I found that strikingly similar to what the plot of this film is, because they don't necessarily go back in time and tell Bill and Ted in the beginning of high school to just be good students so you never go to military school. Just get like a C average, guys. Like practice, in your garage. No, it's this very specific thing. I like the concept of this. What holds up the humor in this, it's very funny. The special effects, this is before CGI. And while I'll say the circuits of time parts are pretty lame, most of the effects, just like the lightning that's around the phone booth, it still totally works. And even the circuits of time, because it's a low budget film, you're like, whatever. And that's fine. Some things that don't really hold up in this film, the Van Halen references, had they said Led Zeppelin or something, which wouldn't have necessarily been the coolest thing in 1989, it might have been a little different. But I will say also, some of the historical figures, I think if you redid it today, you probably wouldn't have picked like Joan of Arc and Billy the Kid, I guess, but you would have just not had him shoot his gun or anything. He would just be the lasso guy. But I'll say one gripe of this is that their report is really not that good for all the effort that they go through. You hinted at it before, Al, but a couple of the guys say what they think of San Dimas, but they're just like, Socrates thinks it's really great. He loves San Dimas. And Abraham Lincoln, the person who put this country back together when it was torn apart, I get he would just say party on, dudes, but I'm just saying as a report, it didn't necessarily wow it that Genghis Khan was just doing like an acrobatic show. It was the first time I ever thought about it that way. And I was like, well, this is awesome in terms of like theater, but in terms of necessarily the criteria of the report.
Well, also, they didn't say anything. Bill and Ted didn't do any analysis. They just had like these other guys say it.
The only thing I can guess is that we can imply that most of their presentation is off camera. So I'm just going to guess that everything that I think is missing from their presentation was done off camera. So that stuff being said, I've laughed a good amount during this film. I thought it was cute. It's a real lean 85 minutes. This film, it really gets to the point really quickly. And I thought it was fun. And I say it stands the test of time. What do you think, Al?
I have to agree with you. I found myself laughing a lot. I found myself smiling a lot throughout. And yeah, there is stuff in here that definitely does not stand the test of time. The idea of a phone booth as a time travel vessel. Apparently in the original draft of the script, it was going to be a van, but the writers thought that it was too close to the DeLorean from Back to the Future, so they changed it.
Ironically, I think a phone booth might work a little better today because it would kind of be like, oh, it's like a 50s thing, like what's it called, Doctor Who.
My son, when he saw the time travel phone booth, said, oh, it's like Doctor Who. And I was like, how do you know what Doctor Who is? How do you know what John Wick is? How do you know all of these things? He's never watched Doctor Who, but I guess it's recognizable enough. The phone booth, the phone book, all of that stuff is a little dated. The tape recorder, the camcorder, there's some anachronistic stuff in there. But by and large, as a comedy, it still works today. A lot of the jokes still land. It's not rife with 80s references, really. The mall thing does kind of stand out. The Van Halen references don't bother me at all. Interesting trivia, Rufus was supposed to be Eddie Van Halen, but there was no way they could afford him, so that did not happen. But I had a great time watching this movie. I'm definitely going to say it stands the test of time, and I'm very curious to see what we think about the sequel, and you can find out when you listen to next week's episode, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. In the meantime, before that happens, we want to hear your thoughts on Bill and Ted, on Genghis Khan, on Socrates, on Mr. the Kid. Talk to us. We are at Test of Time Pod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we will see you next time, everybody.
Goodbye, everyone. And for those who listen to the very last moment of the podcast, we have a special guest, Mr. Keanu Reeves. I just want to ask you, Mr. Reeves, what was your favorite line from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure? We only have 3 seconds left, sir.
Whoa.